When the great gods divided the cosmos, Anu took the heavens as his domain, Enlil claimed the surface of the earth, and Enki descended into the Abzu, the watery abyss beneath. In those depths, far from the eyes of mortals, structures were raised that defied the understanding of men. Cities that would one day sink beneath the waves, carrying with them secrets that humanity was never meant to discover. From the Sumerian text, Enki and the World Order, circa 2100 BCE, what if the gods of ancient mythology were not divine beings at all, but visitors from distant stars who established their presence not just on land, but beneath the oceans of our world? What if the greatest archaeological discovery in human history lies not in desert sands or jungle ruins, but submerged thousands of feet below the surface of our seas, waiting in darkness? Could it be that the mythological city of the Anunnaki, the place where these alleged extraterrestrial beings conducted their most secretive operations, still exists somewhere in the abyssal depths, its impossible architecture preserved by the crushing pressure and eternal night of the deep ocean? For thousands of years, cultures across every continent have spoken of advanced civilizations that existed before recorded history, societies that possessed knowledge and capabilities far beyond what conventional archaeology tells us should have been possible. The Sumerians, who appeared seemingly out of nowhere in Mesopotamia around 4500 BCE, with a fully developed writing system, advanced mathematics, and sophisticated astronomical knowledge, spoke repeatedly of the Anunnaki, beings who descended from the heavens and taught humanity the foundations of civilization. The word Anunnaki itself, translated from the ancient cuneiform, means those who from heaven to earth came, a description that ancient astronaut theorists argue is too explicit to be merely metaphorical. These were not abstract spiritual entities in Sumerian texts, but physical beings with specific names, genealogies, conflicts, and most intriguingly, physical locations where they resided and worked. Among these locations, one stands out in the ancient records as particularly mysterious, a place associated with Enki, the Sumerian god of wisdom, fresh water, and what the texts describe as secret knowledge. This was the Abzu, a term conventionally translated as the primordial waters or the underground ocean, but which Zecharia Sitchin and other alternative researchers have argued might refer to an actual physical installation, possibly submerged beneath the Persian Gulf or even deeper in the Indian Ocean. Before we journey into these controversial waters, a necessary disclaimer. What follows are propositions that exist far outside the boundaries of conventional academia, interpretations of ancient texts and archaeological anomalies that most mainstream scholars reject outright. As Aristotle wisely observed, it is the mark of an educated mind to be able to entertain a thought without accepting it. We present multiple perspectives, conventional and alternative, and encourage you to examine the evidence and reasoning with critical thinking. Our goal is not to provide definitive answers, but to explore possibilities that challenge our understanding of human origins and the ancient past. The journey we are about to undertake will examine submerged structures discovered in locations around the world, structures that display characteristics that seem to defy the technological capabilities of the cultures that supposedly built them. We will analyze ancient texts that describe underwater cities, diving technology, and beings who moved freely between land and sea. We will investigate the geological evidence, the mathematical precision of megalithic constructions found beneath the waves, and the disturbing possibility that human history as we understand it is fundamentally incomplete. We begin our investigation not in the depths of the ocean, but in the desert, in the ancient clay tablets of Sumer, where the oldest written records of human civilization tell a story that, if taken literally rather than symbolically, suggests an origin for humanity that would overturn every established historical paradigm. The traditional academic interpretation of Sumerian mythology presents the Anunnaki as a pantheon of deities, supernatural beings created by the human imagination to explain natural phenomena, to codify moral law, and to legitimize the authority of kings and priests. In this view, the elaborate creation myths, the stories of gods descending from the heavens, the accounts of humans being created to serve divine masters, all of these are understood as allegories, metaphors through which ancient people made sense of their world. The Enuma Elish, the Babylonian creation epic that draws heavily from earlier Sumerian sources, describes how the god Marduk defeated the primordial chaos monster Tiamat, and from her body created the heavens and the earth. Mainstream scholars interpret this as a mythological expression of order emerging from chaos, a common theme in ancient Near Eastern religion. Similarly, the story of human creation in the Atrahasis epic, where the gods create humans from clay mixed with the blood of a slain god to serve as workers, is understood as reflecting the Mesopotamian view of humanity's purpose within a divinely ordered cosmos, slaves to the gods who must labor to provide offerings and maintain temples. The archaeological establishment has worked within this framework for over a century, and the evidence they point to seems substantial. The Sumerian civilization emerged gradually over centuries, they argue, developing from earlier Ubaid culture settlements, showing clear continuity in pottery styles, architectural techniques, and religious symbolism. The cuneiform writing system evolved from simple pictographic accounting marks to complex literature over many generations, a process documented in the archaeological record. The mathematical and astronomical achievements of the Sumerians, while impressive, can be explained as the result of centuries of systematic observation and record-keeping by a priestly class with both the motivation and the resources to pursue such knowledge. The ziggurat temples, massive stepped pyramids that dominated Mesopotamian cities, are understood as mountains for the gods, symbolic representations of the cosmic mountain where heaven and earth meet, built by human hands through organized labor over many years. The stories of gods descending from above are explained as a natural human tendency to place divine beings in the sky, the realm beyond human reach, a pattern seen in cultures worldwide. There is nothing in the Sumerian texts, conventional scholars argue, that cannot be understood through the lens of mythology, symbolism, and ancient religious thought. The gods are personifications of natural forces, cosmic principles, and human psychology, not actual beings. To read these texts as historical records of extraterrestrial contact, they contend, is to fundamentally misunderstand the nature of ancient literature and to impose modern science fiction concepts onto a culture that had no such framework. This is the orthodox position, taught in universities, presented in museums, and defended vigorously against alternative interpretations. But there is another way to read these texts, a perspective that emerged most prominently through the controversial work of Zecharia Sitchin, who proposed that the Sumerian tablets should be understood not as mythology, but as a form of history, perhaps distorted and incomplete, but fundamentally rooted in actual events involving actual beings. Sitchin, an independent scholar fluent in ancient Hebrew and familiar with Sumerian cuneiform, published his first book, The 12th Planet, in 1976, presenting a radical reinterpretation of Mesopotamian creation myths. His central thesis was that the Anunnaki were not gods but extraterrestrial beings from a planet he called Nibiru, allegedly in a long elliptical orbit around our Sun, returning to the inner solar system every 3,600 years. According to Sitchin's translations and interpretations, the Anunnaki came to Earth approximately 450,000 years ago in search of gold, which they needed to repair the atmosphere of their home planet. They initially attempted to extract gold themselves, but found the labor too arduous, leading them to create a worker species through genetic manipulation, modifying the existing hominids on Earth to create Homo sapiens. This creation is described in the Atrahasis epic and the Epic of Gilgamesh, where the god Enki and the goddess Ninhursag mix the essence of the gods with the clay of the earth, which Sitchin interpreted as genetic engineering, combining Anunnaki DNA with that of Homo erectus. The humans were created to work in the mines, to dig the gold that the Anunnaki required, and initially lived as slaves under direct Anunnaki supervision. But over time, some of the Anunnaki, particularly Enki, developed sympathy for humanity, taught them forbidden knowledge, and even interbred with human women, creating hybrid offspring, a theme that appears not only in Sumerian texts, but also in the biblical book of Genesis, where the Nephilim, the giants, are described as the offspring of the sons of God and the daughters of men. The Sumerian king list, an ancient document that chronicles the rulers of Sumer, begins with kings who reigned for impossibly long periods, tens of thousands of years before the Great Flood, which Sitchin argued represented the actual lifespan of Anunnaki rulers before a catastrophic deluge reset human civilization. After the flood, described in the Epic of Gilgamesh and paralleled in the biblical account of Noah, the Anunnaki withdrew from direct rule, but continued to influence human affairs through chosen intermediaries, establishing the first human civilizations and teaching them agriculture, metallurgy, mathematics, astronomy, writing and law. The Anunnaki established multiple installations on Earth, Sitchin argued, with their main spaceport in Mesopotamia, a control center in Jerusalem, and importantly for our investigation, an underwater facility associated with Enki, located in what the Sumerians called the Abzu. This facility, according to alternative interpretations of the texts, was not merely a mythological concept, but an actual submerged structure, possibly in the Persian Gulf, possibly deeper in the Indian Ocean, where Enki conducted genetic experiments, preserved knowledge, and perhaps most provocatively, where certain structures and technologies might remain to this day, hidden beneath thousands of feet of water. Sitchin's work has been heavily criticized by mainstream academics, who argue that his translations are selective, his interpretations are influenced by modern science fiction, and his astronomical claims about the planet Nibiru are unsupported by evidence and contradict established planetary science. Yet his ideas have inspired a generation of alternative researchers and have found resonance with millions of readers worldwide who sense that the conventional explanations for human origins and ancient capabilities leave too many questions unanswered. Whether one accepts Sitchin's specific theories or not, his core challenge remains provocative. If we read the Sumerian texts literally, if we take them at their word rather than assuming everything must be symbolic, what story do they tell? And if we find physical evidence that seems to support aspects of that literal reading, structures beneath the ocean that display impossible precision, myths from around the world that tell suspiciously similar stories of gods from the sky and lost underwater cities, does the conventional dismissal of these ideas as pseudoscience begin to look more like intellectual rigidity than scholarly caution? There is a particular detail in the Sumerian accounts that becomes crucial to our investigation, a description that appears repeatedly in connection with Enki and the Abzu, and which alternative researchers argue cannot be easily explained away as pure mythology. We will return to this detail later, but keep it in mind as we examine what has actually been discovered beneath the world's oceans, structures that seem to echo the impossible architecture described in these ancient texts. As we transition from ancient mythology to physical evidence, we enter a realm where the waters become murky in more ways than one, where claims and counterclaims swirl around underwater discoveries that, depending on whom you ask, represent either evidence of unknown ancient civilizations or natural geological formations misidentified by over-eager researchers. Let us begin with what is not disputed, the geological fact that sea levels have fluctuated dramatically throughout human prehistory. During the last ice age, which reached its maximum extent approximately 20,000 years ago, sea levels were approximately 400 feet lower than they are today. Vast areas that are now submerged beneath coastal waters were then dry land, including extensive territories in Southeast Asia, a sunken continent that geologists call Sunderland, which connected modern Indonesia, Malaysia, and parts of Indochina into a single landmass. The Persian Gulf, where Sumerian civilization later flourished, was largely dry land during this period, a river valley with fertile plains. The Mediterranean coast extended much farther out, as did the coastlines of India, the Americas, everywhere. As the ice sheets melted between 18,000 and 7,000 years ago, the seas rose dramatically in several pulse events, flooding these coastal regions and drowning whatever structures or settlements might have existed there. This geological reality is accepted by mainstream science and provides a framework for understanding why we might find human artifacts or even structures beneath the ocean. If humans were living in these coastal areas before the floods, which archaeological evidence confirms they were, then their settlements now lie underwater. The question is, what kind of settlements were these simple fishing villages of hunter-gatherers, or something more advanced? And if we find underwater structures that display sophisticated engineering, How do we explain them when conventional history tells us that humans during that period were not yet supposed to have developed complex architecture? In 1985, Japanese divers exploring the waters off the coast of Yonaguni, the southernmost island of Japan, discovered a massive underwater formation that has become one of the most controversial archaeological sites in the world. The Yonaguni Monument, as it came to be known, is an enormous structure approximately 240 feet long, 90 feet wide, and 75 feet tall, featuring flat terraces, vertical walls, right angles, and what appear to be carved steps, channels, and even what some researchers have interpreted as roads and megalithic pillars. The formation lies in relatively shallow water, about 75 to 100 feet below the surface, and is composed of sandstone and mudstone. The discovery was publicized by Masaki Kimura, a marine geologist from the University of the Ryukyus, who has spent decades studying the site and has argued passionately that it is not a natural formation, but a man-made structure, carved from the living rock and later submerged as sea levels rose. Kimura points to numerous features that seem to defy natural explanation, including precise 90-degree angles, uniform terracing with consistent step heights of approximately 6 feet, what appear to be post holes that might have supported wooden structures, triangular shapes carved into the rock, and most strikingly, what looks like a massive face carved into one section, featuring eyes, a nose, and a mouth. If the Yonaguni Monument is indeed artificial, the implications for history are profound. Based on the last time this area was above water, the structure would have to be at least 10,000 years old, possibly much older, predating the earliest known megalithic architecture anywhere in the world, and challenging the entire conventional timeline of human civilization. However, the mainstream geological consensus, represented most prominently by Robert Schoch, a geologist from Boston University who visited the site in 1997, is that the Yonaguni Monument is a natural geological formation, the result of tectonic activity, erosion, and the way sedimentary rock naturally fractures along parallel planes, creating features that can mimic artificial construction. Schoch acknowledges that some aspects of the formation are unusual, and that there may have been minor human modification of natural features, but he maintains that the structure is fundamentally natural. The debate continues, with each side pointing to evidence that seems to support their position, and with neither side convincing the other. But Yonaguni is not alone. In 2002, researchers using sonar scanning equipment in the Gulf of Cambay, also known as the Gulf of Khambat, off the coast of Gujarat in western India, detected what appeared to be massive structures in about 120 feet of water, covering an area of approximately 2 square miles. The discovery was made by the National Institute of Ocean Technology in India during routine pollution studies, and the sonar readings showed geometric patterns that seemed to indicate urban planning, including what appeared to be massive walls, buildings arranged in a grid pattern, and other features suggesting organized construction. Samples dredged from the site included worked stones, pottery fragments, and pieces of wood that, when carbon dated, produced dates ranging from 7,500 to 9,500 years old. If these dates and the interpretation of the sonar images are correct, this would represent a major city older than the Sumerian civilization, older than ancient Egypt, contemporary with or predating the earliest known cities in human history. The discovery generated enormous excitement in India and among alternative researchers worldwide, but it has also been met with intense skepticism. Critics argue that the sonar images are ambiguous, that the artifacts could have been transported by river currents from elsewhere, that the carbon dating of isolated samples does not prove the age of the structures, and that the geological surveys are insufficient to confirm the site is artificial rather than natural. The Indian government has conducted limited exploration, but has not committed to a full-scale underwater excavation, leaving the site in a state of archaeological limbo, claimed by some as evidence of a lost civilization, dismissed by others as wishful thinking based on insufficient evidence. Moving to the Mediterranean, we find the submerged ruins of Pavlopetri, off the southern coast of Greece, a site that is unquestionably an ancient city underwater, approximately 5,000 years old, featuring streets, buildings, courtyards, and tombs from the Bronze Age. Pavlopetri is accepted by mainstream archaeology as a genuine underwater archaeological site, proof that ancient settlements can indeed be found beneath the sea. However, it represents a known historical culture, the Mycenaean civilization, and poses no challenge to conventional history. Yet its existence demonstrates that underwater archaeology is a legitimate field and that major structures can be submerged and preserved. What makes sites like Yonaguni and the Gulf of Cambay controversial is not that they are underwater, but that they potentially predate what mainstream history says should exist. If we expand our search globally, we find similar controversial claims in multiple locations. Off the coast of Cuba in 2001, researchers using sophisticated sonar detected what they interpreted as geometric patterns resembling pyramids, roads, and buildings at a depth of approximately 2,000 feet in an area off the western tip of Cuba. The depth is problematic because if these are artificial structures, they would have to have been built when sea levels were much lower, which would make them extraordinarily ancient, perhaps 50,000 years or more, far older than any known civilization. The discovery was made by Advanced Digital Communications, a company doing exploratory work in the area, and they produced sonar images that showed symmetrical patterns that seemed too regular to be natural. However, follow-up investigations have been limited, and the academic community largely dismisses the findings as either misinterpreted natural formations or equipment artifacts. The depth is so extreme that direct exploration would require specialized submersibles, making verification prohibitively expensive. Off the coast of India near Mahabalipuram, local legends speak of the 7 pagodas, a group of temples that allegedly once stood on the shore but were swallowed by the sea. In 2002, after a tsunami temporarily receded the waters, and again after the 2004 Indian Ocean tsunami, divers found underwater structures including walls, steps, and what appeared to be carved lions and elephants, corresponding to the legendary temples. These structures have been investigated by the Archaeological Survey of India and appear to be genuine ancient constructions, possibly 1,200 to 1,500 years old, submerged by coastal erosion and sea level changes. While not as ancient as other controversial sites, Mahabalipuram demonstrates that temple complexes can indeed end up underwater, and that local legends sometimes preserve memories of these lost structures. In the Okinawa region near Yonaguni, additional underwater formations have been discovered that show similar characteristics, including what Japanese researchers call the Kerama Formation, with flat surfaces, sharp edges, and right angles. In Malta, underwater structures have been found that some researchers connect to the ancient megalithic temples on the island, suggesting that a more extensive civilization existed before parts of it were submerged. Off the coast of England, there is Doggerland, a now submerged landmass that connected Britain to continental Europe until about 8,000 years ago, where Stone Age artifacts have been found, confirming human habitation. What all of these discoveries share is the reality that vast areas of land where humans once lived are now underwater, and that we have explored perhaps less than 5% of the ocean floor with any detail. The technology to map and explore the deep ocean is expensive and limited, primarily used for commercial and military purposes rather than archaeological exploration. This means that whatever structures might exist in the deeper waters remain undiscovered, and the question is not whether human settlements were submerged by rising seas, which is geological fact, but what kind of settlements were they, and how advanced were they? Alternative researchers argue that among these submerged sites there may be installations created or influenced by the Anunnaki, the underwater facilities described in Sumerian texts as the domain of Enki. They point to characteristics of some of these structures that seem to exceed the capabilities of the cultures allegedly responsible for them. Before we examine these characteristics in detail, we need to return to the ancient texts themselves, to what they specifically say about underwater installations and about the technologies that might have been employed to build them. There is a passage in the Enuma Elish that conventional scholars translate metaphorically, but which alternative researchers read quite differently, a description that will become crucial as we examine the physical evidence. We will reveal what that passage says after we explore the cultural connections between the Sumerian accounts and similar myths from other civilizations. Myths that speak of the same themes with striking consistency. Across the ancient world, separated by thousands of miles and supposedly developing independently, according to mainstream history, cultures describe strikingly similar narratives about beings from the sky or the sea who brought civilization to humanity, about great floods that destroyed earlier advanced societies, and about underwater realms where gods or divine beings dwelled. The consistency of these accounts has long puzzled researchers, and has led some to propose that these myths preserve a memory of actual historical events involving a technologically advanced culture, or, as alternative theorists argue, extraterrestrial visitors who interacted with multiple human populations across the globe. In ancient Egypt, the god Osiris was associated with water, agriculture, and civilization, and was said to have taught humanity the arts of farming and building. His body, according to myth, was scattered across Egypt and later reassembled, a story that some alternative researchers interpret as a metaphor for the distribution of knowledge across multiple sites. The Egyptian texts also describe the Zep Tepi, the first time, an epoch when gods walked the earth and established the foundations of Egyptian civilization. Mainstream Egyptology interprets this as mythological prehistory, but alternative researchers note that the Sphinx and some of the megalithic structures at Giza show evidence of water erosion, suggesting they might be much older than conventionally dated, possibly predating the Pharaonic period by thousands of years. Robert Schoch, despite his skepticism about Yonaguni, has argued based on weathering patterns that the Sphinx might date to 7,000 to 9,000 BCE, a conclusion that would require revising Egyptian history. If the Sphinx is indeed that ancient, it suggests that advanced construction capabilities existed in Egypt long before the supposed dawn of civilization, capabilities that then mysteriously disappeared only to re-emerge with the dynastic period. The Egyptian creation myths also describe a primordial ocean called Nun, from which the first land emerged, an image that parallels the Sumerian Abzu and suggests a shared motif or possibly a shared memory of an actual deluge. In the Vedic traditions of India, we encounter remarkably similar themes. The ancient Sanskrit texts describe the Asuras and Devas, races of powerful beings who fought wars in the sky using incredible weapons and flying vehicles called Vimanas. The Mahabharata, one of India's great epics, contains descriptions of aerial battles and weapons that some researchers argue sound remarkably like modern military technology. One passage describes a weapon that created a burst of light and heat so intense it vaporized everything in a wide radius, leaving a description that eerily parallels nuclear weapons. While mainstream scholars interpret these as poetic exaggerations and mythological hyperbole, alternative researchers ask whether these might be descriptions of actual ancient technologies, either developed by an unknown advanced human civilization or provided by extraterrestrial visitors. The Vedic texts also describe underwater cities, particularly in connection with Krishna, who, according to legend, ruled the city of Dwarka, which was eventually submerged by the ocean. Interestingly, in the late 20th century, underwater archaeological expeditions off the coast of Gujarat in India discovered submerged ruins at the location where tradition places Dwarka, structures that have been carbon dated to approximately 1,500 to 3,500 years ago. While these dates place it within known historical periods, the discovery demonstrates that the Vedic texts sometimes describe real places and real events, not pure fiction. Could other aspects of the Vedic narratives also be rooted in historical reality? The texts describe Varuna, the god of the oceans and the cosmic order, who dwells in an underwater palace and possesses knowledge of all secrets. This mirrors the Sumerian Enki, who rules the Abzu and is the keeper of the Mi, the divine decrees that govern all aspects of civilization and cosmic law. The parallels between these figures from completely different cultures are striking. Both are water deities, both are associated with wisdom and forbidden knowledge, both dwell in underwater realms, and both play crucial roles in the creation and education of humanity. Could these be descriptions of the same entity or the same type of entity, known by different names in different cultures? In Mesoamerica, the Aztecs and Maya speak of Quetzalcoatl and Kukulkan, the feathered serpent god who came from across the sea, brought civilization to the people, taught them agriculture and astronomy, established laws, and then departed with a promise to return. The description of Quetzalcoatl in the ancient codices is peculiar, described as having a beard and pale skin, characteristics not typical of Native American populations, leading some researchers to speculate that this might have been an actual foreign visitor, possibly from an advanced culture, possibly from beyond Earth. The Mesoamerican legends also describe multiple ages of the world, each ending in cataclysm, with the current world being the fifth iteration. The previous world ages were destroyed by various disasters, including floods, suggesting that these cultures preserved memories of actual catastrophic events. The precision of Mayan astronomy, their advanced mathematical systems, including the concept of zero which they developed independently of the Old World, and their sophisticated calendar systems all point to a culture with capabilities that seem precocious for their supposed level of technological development. How did they achieve such knowledge without the accumulated observations of earlier advanced civilizations? Or did such civilizations exist but have been erased from the conventional historical record by catastrophe and time? The Polynesian cultures spread across the vast Pacific Ocean possess legends of Tangaroa or Kanaloa, gods of the ocean who created humanity and who dwell beneath the waves. The Pacific Islanders also preserve traditions of sunken lands, including the legend of Mu or Lemuria, a vast continent that supposedly existed in the Pacific and was destroyed by cataclysm. While mainstream geology has largely disproved the existence of sunken continents in the Pacific, there were extensive low-lying areas that were submerged as sea levels rose, and it is possible that these legends preserve memories of those inundations. The ability of Polynesian navigators to traverse thousands of miles of open ocean and colonize remote islands demonstrates a sophisticated understanding of astronomy, ocean currents, and navigation that required accumulated knowledge passed down through generations. Could this knowledge have been inherited from an earlier maritime culture? In South America, the Inca and pre-Inca cultures speak of Viracocha, a creator deity who emerged from Lake Titicaca, taught humanity civilization, and then walked across the Pacific Ocean. The megalithic ruins at Tiwanaku near Lake Titicaca display construction techniques that baffle modern engineers, including massive stones cut with extreme precision and fitted together so tightly that not even a razor blade can be inserted between them. These stones, some weighing over 100 tons, were transported from quarries many miles away across difficult terrain and assembled with no known ancient technology that could have moved them. The conventional explanation is that thousands of workers used ropes, rollers, and ramps, but experimental archaeology has struggled to replicate these feats. The precision of the stone cutting, with angles measured to within fractions of a degree, suggests the use of advanced tools. Yet no metal tools have been found that could have cut the igneous rock from which many of these structures are built. Even more mysteriously, Tiwanaku sits at an altitude of about 12,500 feet, yet shows evidence of having once been a port city, with docks and harbors, suggesting it was at a much lower altitude when built, or that Lake Titicaca was once much larger. Geological studies indicate the lake has fluctuated in size, but not to the extent necessary to make Tiwanaku a viable port at its current elevation, leading alternative researchers to propose that major geological changes occurred in the region, possibly related to the same catastrophes that caused sea levels to rise globally. In the Middle East, the biblical account in Genesis describes the Nephilim, the giants born from the union of the sons of God and the daughters of men, existing before the Great Flood. The Book of Enoch, an ancient Jewish text not included in most biblical canons, provides extensive details about these watchers, angels who descended to earth, took human wives, taught forbidden knowledge including metallurgy, warfare, cosmetics, and magic, and whose hybrid offspring became giants who corrupted the earth, leading God to initiate the flood to cleanse creation. Whether interpreted as mythology or as a distorted historical account, the parallels to the Sumerian narratives are undeniable. The Sumerian accounts describe the Anunnaki interbreeding, with humans creating a hybrid lineage, teaching humanity various technologies, and then a great flood being sent by Enlil to destroy humanity, with Enki secretly warning his chosen humans Eusudra or Atrahasis to build an ark. The biblical account describes nearly identical events, with Noah warned by God to build an ark to survive a divinely sent deluge. Are these separate mythologies that happen to tell the same story, or are they different cultural versions of the same historical events? The flood narratives appear in over 200 cultures worldwide, from the Greek story of Deucalion to the Native American legends to the Aboriginal Australian traditions. This universal presence of flood myths has led some researchers to argue that they preserve a memory of the actual flooding that occurred as the Ice Age ended, a series of catastrophic inundations that destroyed coastal settlements and traumatized the survivors, creating stories that were passed down through generations. But if these are mere exaggerations of natural events, why do so many of them include details about advanced civilizations existing before the flood? Civilizations with capabilities that rival or exceed our own. The Chinese Huangdi, or Yellow Emperor, is described in ancient texts as descending from the sky in a flying chariot, establishing civilization and possessing powers that seem technological, including the ability to create weapons and tools from metal. The Aboriginal Australians speak of the Wangina, sky beings who came from the ocean and the sky, brought laws and knowledge, and are depicted in ancient rock art with large eyes, no mouths, and headdresses that some researchers argue resemble modern depictions of astronauts or divers. The consistency of these themes across unconnected cultures is either a coincidental product of universal human psychology projecting similar archetypes, as mainstream anthropology argues, or it represents a common source, a shared historical experience with beings who interacted with multiple cultures across the ancient world. Alternative researchers contend that the evidence points toward the latter interpretation, that the Anunnaki or their equivalent visited multiple locations, established installations in various regions, taught selected humans certain technologies and knowledge, and that these interactions were remembered and transformed into the founding myths of civilizations worldwide. If this interpretation has merit, then we should expect to find physical evidence of these installations, particularly the underwater facilities that the texts associate with Enki, the god most sympathetic to humanity, the one who shared forbidden knowledge and who saved humanity from the flood. And as we examine the submerged structures that have been discovered, we find characteristics that seem difficult to explain through conventional archaeology alone, characteristics that suggest a level of technological sophistication that should not have existed according to our current understanding of human development in the prehistoric period. Before we dive deeper into the technical specifications of these structures, we need to address a question that has likely occurred to many. As Enki supposedly shared knowledge with humanity, as these ancient cultures allegedly had contact with advanced beings, why did human civilization then seemingly regress? Why did the Bronze Age collapse occur? Why did the Dark Ages follow Rome? If humanity possessed or was given advanced knowledge, where did it go? Skeptics point to this as evidence against the ancient astronaut hypothesis, arguing that technological development is cumulative and does not simply vanish. But is that actually true? History shows us that knowledge can be lost. The Library of Alexandria burned, destroying countless texts. The Bronze Age collapse saw the disappearance of writing systems and the loss of technologies. The fall of Rome led to the loss of concrete, aqueduct engineering, and architectural capabilities that took centuries to rediscover. Knowledge resides in books, in institutions, in the continuity of teaching from master to apprentice. When those systems break down through war, plague, or environmental catastrophe, knowledge can vanish within a single generation. If the ancient world possessed capabilities given to them by the Anunnaki, and if those capabilities were concentrated in a few centers of learning, the destruction of those centers through the catastrophes described in the ancient texts, including the flood, could have effectively reset human civilization, leaving only scattered survivors with fragmented memories of what had been lost. This would explain both the sudden appearance of advanced cultures like Sumer with no clear antecedent and the presence of inexplicable ancient structures that seem to have been built with technologies that their supposed builders should not have possessed. As we examine the technical specifications of the underwater structures, Keep in mind that we are not looking merely for evidence of ancient construction, but for evidence of construction that exceeds what we think should have been possible, anomalies that demand explanation. Just as Enki was said to have operated in secret in the depths of the Abzu, perhaps the most compelling evidence of an advanced ancient presence remains hidden in the places we have explored the least, beneath thousands of feet of water, in the abyssal darkness, where the pressure would crush any human investigator, where only the most sophisticated modern submersibles can venture, and where ancient structures might remain perfectly preserved, waiting to be discovered. Now we must confront the physical evidence in detail, examining the specific characteristics of underwater structures that alternative researchers argue demonstrate capabilities beyond what conventional archaeology attributes to ancient cultures. This requires looking at measurements, at engineering challenges, at the mathematics of construction, and at the simple question of how certain things could have been accomplished with the tools and technologies we believe ancient peoples possessed. Let us return to the Yonaguni monument and examine it not through the lens of interpretation, but through the lens of measurement and engineering analysis. The structure, carved from a single piece of bedrock, extends approximately 240 feet in length and rises 75 feet from the ocean floor to its highest point. The main platform is flat to within a tolerance that Masaaki Kimura has measured at less than 2 degrees of variation across its entire surface, a level of precision that is difficult to achieve even with modern equipment and virtually impossible through natural erosion. The steps that descend the structure show uniform riser heights of approximately 6 feet, a consistency maintained across multiple levels, suggesting intentional design rather than random fracturing. Natural geological formations can create step-like features through a process called joint block separation, where sedimentary rock fractures along parallel planes of weakness, but these fractures produce irregular step heights and rough surfaces. The Yonaguni steps show smooth treads and uniform geometry. Kimura has identified approximately 25 distinct features that he argues could not have formed naturally, including post holes that appear to have been drilled into the rock with circular precision, channels cut into the surface that run straight for dozens of feet, and then turn at right angles, and what appears to be a carved face with symmetrical features. Critics respond that the human eye is predisposed to find patterns and faces in random formations, a phenomenon called pareidolia, which is why we see faces in clouds or the man in the moon. But if we apply strict geometric analysis to the Yonaguni formation, we find angles that are too precise, surfaces too flat, and spatial relationships too systematic to easily dismiss as coincidence. The site also contains what appears to be a looped road that runs around the structure, carved into the rock at a consistent width and depth, and what looks like a carved turtle, a triangular pool, and a circular depression that might have served as some kind of ceremonial or functional installation. Geologists who support the natural formation hypothesis argue that the sandstone and mudstone of the region tend to fracture in ways that can produce these features, pointing to similar formations on the nearby shore that are indisputably natural. But Kimura counters that the Yonaguni monument shows characteristics found in both the natural coastal formations and additionally shows clear signs of human modification, suggesting that ancient people took a natural formation and carved it into a massive architectural complex. He proposes that the structure was built approximately 10,000 to 12,000 years ago, when the area was above water and was used as a temple or ceremonial center, possibly by the ancestors of the Jomon culture that later inhabited Japan. The Jomon people, who existed from approximately 14,000 to 300 BCE, are known for their sophisticated pottery, some of the oldest in the world, but are not credited with megalithic architecture. If Yonaguni is artificial and dates to the Jomon period or earlier, it would require completely revising our understanding of their capabilities. Alternatively, if it predates the Jomon culture, then we must ask who built it. The engineering required to carve such a massive structure from living rock would have demanded advanced stoneworking tools, sophisticated measuring instruments to maintain the geometric precision, a large organized labor force, and a compelling reason to invest such enormous effort. What could have motivated such a project? If we accept the alternative interpretation that this was an Anunnaki installation or a structure built under Anunnaki direction, then it might have served purposes we can only speculate about, perhaps as a platform for observing the oceans, a marker for navigation, a ceremonial site related to their religious or social practices, or even a component of a larger network of structures that once existed across the region. The Gulf of Cambay discovery presents different, but equally intriguing questions. The sonar imaging conducted by the National Institute of Ocean Technology revealed geometric patterns spread across approximately 2 square miles at a depth of about 120 feet. The grid-like arrangement suggests urban planning, with what appear to be major boulevards running in straight lines and smaller streets intersecting at regular intervals. Acoustic imaging detected blocks that seemed to have regular dimensions, and magnetic surveys indicated anomalies consistent with concentrations of human construction materials. The samples retrieved included pieces of worked stone, some showing signs of tool marks, wood samples that carbon dated to between 7,500 and 9,500 years ago, and pottery fragments. The carbon dating, if accurate, is extraordinary. This would make the site contemporary with the earliest Neolithic settlements in the Middle East, thousands of years before the Harappan civilization arose in the Indus Valley, the earliest known urban culture in the Indian subcontinent. A city of this age in this location would rewrite Indian history and would suggest that urban civilization began much earlier than currently believed. However, critics raise several valid concerns. First, the carbon dating was performed on samples that might have been transported to the site by rivers, particularly the ancient Saraswati River that some geologists believe once flowed through the region but changed course or dried up thousands of years ago. If wood or pottery washed down from riverside settlements and settled in the Gulf, the dates would tell us about those settlements, not about structures on the seafloor. Second, sonar imaging, while valuable, can produce ambiguous results, especially in murky water with poor visibility. Patterns that look geometric in sonar might be natural underwater ridges, sandbanks, or rock formations. Without direct visual confirmation and detailed archaeological excavation, conclusions remain speculative. The Indian government initially showed enthusiasm for the discovery, but after the preliminary investigations, funding for further exploration was not allocated, leaving the site in limbo. Some researchers suggest political and religious sensitivities might play a role, as discovering a major civilization that predates Vedic culture could challenge certain narratives about Indian history and Hindu origins. Others argue that simply lack of resources and the technical difficulty of underwater excavation at that depth with the strong currents and poor visibility in the Gulf make the project impractical. What remains is tantalizing but incomplete evidence, enough to raise questions but not to provide definitive answers. If the site is indeed a submerged city dating to 7500 BCE or earlier, it would represent a level of social organization and architectural capability that should not have existed according to conventional historical models. At that time, most human populations worldwide were still hunter-gatherers or had just begun experimenting with early agriculture. The construction of a city with urban planning, major structures, and a population large enough to sustain such a settlement would require a quantum leap in social complexity that has no precedent in the archaeological record. Unless, as alternative researchers propose, the city was not built entirely by indigenous human populations, but with the assistance or direction of technologically advanced outsiders, the Anunnaki, who might have established an outpost in the region. The Gujarat coast, facing the Arabian Sea and relatively close to the mouth of the Persian Gulf, would have been a strategic location for an installation connected to the maritime operations described in Sumerian texts as originating from the Abzu. Moving to the Cuban anomaly detected in 2001, we encounter a case where depth becomes the central puzzle. The sonar images captured by advanced digital communications showed what appeared to be symmetrical structures, including what looked like pyramids or stepped platforms arranged in a geometric pattern at a depth of approximately 2,000 feet. This is far deeper than any other claimed underwater structure, and far deeper than areas that were above water during the last ice age. For the structures to have been built on dry land, they would have had to date to a time when sea levels were 2,000 feet lower than today, which last occurred during the early Pleistocene, well over 100,000 years ago, long before even Homo sapiens evolved in Africa, according to current paleoanthropological models. This alone has led most mainstream scientists to reject the interpretation that the sonar images show artificial structures. The alternative explanations are that the patterns are natural geological formations, that the sonar images are artifacts of the equipment or data processing, or that the patterns are being misinterpreted. Without direct visual confirmation, which would require expensive submersible operations, the question cannot be resolved definitively. But if, hypothetically, the structures are artificial, we are forced into one of several extraordinary conclusions. Either intelligent beings were building underwater structures over 100,000 years ago, which would require rewriting everything we think we know about human evolution and prehistory, or the structures were built more recently, but built specifically as underwater installations, not built on land and then submerged. This second possibility brings us back to the Sumerian texts and to what they say about the Abzu. Enki's domain is explicitly described as being in or under the water, not as a land-based temple that was later flooded. The Epic of Eridu speaks of Enki establishing his abode in the Abzu, which he makes into a shining place with fresh water, plants, and sacred areas, a description that some alternative researchers interpret not as a mythological underworld, but as an actual underwater or underground installation. Possibly a dome or structure, built on the seafloor with technology far beyond ancient human capabilities. If the Anunnaki were indeed an advanced civilization or extraterrestrial visitors, building underwater installations would offer several advantages, including protection from surface disasters like floods or meteors, concealment from potential hostiles, stable temperatures, and access to oceanic resources. Modern military organizations build underwater bases and research stations, so the concept is not inherently absurd, only absurd if attributed to cultures we think lacked the necessary technology. But what if they did not lack the technology? What if, as Sitchin argued, the Anunnaki provided certain technological capabilities to human workers or used their own advanced equipment to construct installations that served their purposes? The structures would then represent not human achievement, but Anunnaki engineering, later preserved or destroyed depending on their depth and location. This brings us to a critical distinction that is often blurred in discussions of ancient mysteries. When we see sophisticated ancient structures, we tend to assume they must have been built either by humans using only the tools we think they had, or they must be natural formations. But there is a third possibility that the ancient astronaut hypothesis proposes: they were built by or with the assistance of non-human intelligences who possessed advanced technology. This third option is rejected by mainstream academia, not primarily because there is no evidence for it, though mainstream scientists would argue there is no credible evidence, but because it violates the methodological naturalism that guides modern science. Science operates on the assumption that natural phenomena can be explained by natural causes without invoking supernatural or extraterrestrial intervention. This methodology has been enormously successful in advancing our understanding of the world, but it also means that evidence for extraterrestrial contact, if it exists, might be systematically filtered out or reinterpreted through the lens of conventional explanations. To determine whether underwater structures show characteristics consistent with advanced construction techniques, we need to examine not just whether they look artificial, but whether they exhibit engineering solutions that exceed the expected capabilities of the cultures supposedly responsible. Let us consider the precision of stone cutting. Ancient megalithic structures at sites like Pumapunku in Bolivia, the Osirion in Egypt, and various sites in Peru display stonework with tolerances measured in fractions of millimeters, with perfectly flat surfaces extending over several square meters, and with complex interlocking shapes that would challenge modern stoneworkers even with power tools. The conventional explanation is that patient grinding and polishing with sand and water over extended periods could achieve these results, and experimental archaeology has shown that this is technically possible, though extremely time-consuming. But the question is not whether it could be done, but whether it would be done. Why invest thousands of hours of labor to achieve precision far beyond what is structurally necessary? Modern buildings do not require such precision. Ancient wooden or mud brick structures did not require such precision. Why then do we find this excessive precision in megalithic stone architecture across multiple continents, in sites attributed to cultures that supposedly had no contact with each other? Alternative researchers argue that this precision is a signature of advanced technology, specifically laser or sonic cutting tools that could shape stone with minimal effort and maximal precision, tools that the Anunnaki might have possessed and might have used in constructing their installations. If underwater structures show similar precision in their stonework or in their geometric layouts, this could be evidence supporting the alternative interpretation. The engineering anomalies found in these underwater formations force us to reconsider the limits of what ancient humanity could accomplish. When viewed through the lens of geometry, proportion, and material science, certain characteristics appear deliberate, not accidental. At Yonaguni, drone-assisted mapping and 3D bathymetric scans have revealed near-perfect parallels and right angles arranged according to harmonic ratios consistent with sacred geometry known from much later civilizations. Ratios of 1.2 and 1 appear repeatedly, as if the builders were working according to an advanced mathematical schema, the same proportions found in the Great Pyramid of Giza, in the Parthenon, and even in the megalithic complexes at Tiwanaku and Ollantaytambo. This repetition across cultures and continents separated by vast oceans raises an unavoidable question. How did societies supposedly evolving independently all adhere to the same geometric canon? Coincidence seems unlikely when the same golden ratio, identical angular alignments to solstices, and precision engineering recur across civilizations not known to have had contact. Could they all have inherited a common template or mathematical system from a single source, an origin civilization that existed before the flood myths, perhaps the civilization of the Anunnaki described in Sumerian texts? At first glance, such a suggestion may appear fantastical. Yet consider what we know from modern science. The DNA of all humans alive today traces back to a remarkably small ancestral population living roughly 200,000 years ago. The genetic bottleneck suggests that humanity nearly vanished at least once in prehistory, before rebounding and spreading across the globe. If an advanced civilization had existed prior to that event, its physical traces might indeed be gone, buried, submerged, or eroded, leaving only myths to preserve fragments of memory. But what if certain artifacts remain, hidden beneath the ocean floor, undisturbed and unreachable by conventional exploration? There is a loop we opened earlier, a detail in the Sumerian texts that links directly to these underwater anomalies. That detail concerns the description of Enki's House of the Waters, a term preserved in tablets known as the Enki and the World Order text. The passage describes how Enki established the shrines of the Abzu, adorned them with lapis lazuli, and caused it to be filled with shimmering light. Mainstream scholars interpret this metaphorically as the beautification of a temple through decoration with blue stone, symbolic of water. But Sitchin and other researchers note the odd specificity: shimmering light emanating from within the Abzu, a phenomenon that could describe the glow of technology rather than mere reflection of light in water. The cuneiform phrase used, melamu, often translated as radiance or aura, is also applied to divine weapons, celestial chariots, and objects of immense power. Was Enki's abode literally shining beneath the waters? If so, what powered that light 6,000 years before the invention of electricity? Could the Sumerians have been describing an illuminated underwater base, perhaps powered by a technology beyond their comprehension? Religious literature often encodes the technological as divine. A rocket becomes a chariot of fire, an electric generator becomes a sacred radiance, and a control room becomes a hall of the gods. What they could not explain scientifically, they expressed theologically. If so, we have to reinterpret sacred vocabulary as a coded record of technological realities. The term Abzu, often written with the cuneiform signs AB, water, and Zu, deep or knowledge, might thus signify not a mythical abyss, but literally a technological installation of knowledge in the water, an underwater facility or repository of data. Could it be that the Abzu was a data vault, a genetic laboratory, or even a power station? Consider that in many mythologies, sacred knowledge, or mi, came from the water. Enki was keeper of the mi, the divine decrees governing civilization, writing, law, architecture, and kingship. The tablets list more than 100 mi, each a domain of knowledge. But where were these kept? The text Inanna and Enki tells us that Inanna traveled to the Abzu to obtain the mi from Enki, who, while drinking beer, agreed to let her take them to Uruk. The story, told in mythic humor, describes her departing in the boat of heaven, carrying the glowing mi. What sort of boat of heaven could carry radiant objects emitting energy across great distance? The phrase sounds eerily like a craft, and the mi sound like physical data modules, or maybe technological devices, objects of knowledge transferred from one location to another. Did the Anunnaki literally transfer advanced data, technology, and perhaps even biological material from Enki's underwater base to other locations upon Earth? If so, could remnants of this facility, the Abzu itself, survive beneath the seas today? This raises the central physical question: where could the Abzu have been located? The Sumerians placed it south of Mesopotamia, associated with Eridu, the oldest known city in southern Iraq. Archaeology has confirmed Eridu's antiquity. It lies near the ancient coastline of the Persian Gulf. Geological studies indicate that in the 4th millennium BCE, the coastline was much farther inland than it is today. Over millennia, sediment from the Tigris and Euphrates rivers extended the delta outward, meaning that Eridu once likely lay on or near the shore. If Enki's temple, the Abzu, House of the Deep Waters, stood there, then further south, beneath what is now the Persian Gulf, could lie the larger domain described in myth. In 2011, a joint study by Oxford University and the University of Hull, called the Gulf Archaeology Project, examined satellite imagery and sediment cores from the Gulf. They identified an ancient river system, up to 100 miles long, buried beneath marine sediment, which they nicknamed the Kuwait River. This paleo-channel would have formed a fertile valley when sea levels were lower around 8000 BCE, a prime location for early settlements. If indeed inhabited, any structures built there would now be underwater, preserved beneath layers of silt. The Gulf's central basin reaches depths of about 300 feet, easily deep enough to submerge an early city when the sea rose after the Ice Age. Could this be the location of the legendary Abzu? Intriguingly, side-scan sonar surveys of parts of the Gulf near Bahrain and Qatar have revealed anomalous shapes on the seabed, rectilinear patterns inconsistent with purely geological processes. Officially, these are dismissed as artifacts of sonar processing or modern debris. Yet their symmetry invites further study, and the waters of the Gulf remain militarily sensitive. Extensive archaeological exploration is restricted. If ancient ruins lie beneath, they wait in silence beneath territories where excavation would be geopolitically difficult. Thus the Abzu remains just beyond our reach, physically and politically. Continuing along this line, we encounter another text, the Epic of Gilgamesh. When Gilgamesh journeys to the waters of death in search of immortality, he must cross the ocean to reach the abode of Utnapishtim, the survivor of the Great Flood. The narrative's geography is vague, but the hero's voyage suggests a journey over vast waters to a hidden realm where divine knowledge is preserved. Could this island beyond the sea correspond to the same underwater domain described as the Abzu? Mainstream academics see this as pure allegory, the sea as metaphor for death, Utnapishtim's abode as the unreachable afterlife. But if one removes the veil of symbolism, the story could describe an actual journey to a remote location, perhaps an island or submerged facility still active after the flood, where the immortals, the surviving Anunnaki, resided. The distinction between metaphor and memory becomes increasingly blurred when myths replicate the physical landscape so consistently. As we look across world mythologies, this pattern repeats with uncanny precision, the motif of divine beings hiding or retreating into underwater cities after a cataclysm. The Dogon tribe of Mali, for instance, described the Nommo, amphibious beings who came from the star Sirius, descended in a great ark that landed on the water, and taught humanity civilization. Their myths preserve astonishing astronomical knowledge. The existence of Sirius B, an invisible white dwarf companion star to Sirius, unknown to modern science until the 19th century. Skeptics suggest coincidence, but anthropologists Marcel Griol and Germain Dieterlen documented that the Dogon knew details about orbital periods and densities inexplicable for a non-literate tribal culture. Were these traditions inherited from contact with beings, literal or metaphorical, described in similar terms as Enki's kind, amphibious gods of knowledge? Across the Persian Gulf in Mesopotamia, the figure of Oannes appears in Babylonian accounts recorded by Berossus in the 3rd century BCE. Oannes is described as a half-man, half-fish being who emerged from the sea each day to teach humanity writing, science, and the arts, then returned to the ocean at night. Berossus claimed Oannes came from the Erythraean Sea, the historical name for the body of water, now known as the Persian Gulf. Oannes is essentially Enki by another name, an aquatic teacher, bearer of civilization, connected explicitly to the Gulf. That ancient scholars localize this myth geographically strengthens the link between the Anunnaki's underwater base and real-world waters now covering ancient land. Modern researchers have begun to quantify how difficult it would have been for early humans to construct anything resembling the submerged formations we observe. Consider the problem of cutting and moving a single 50-ton limestone block, the approximate mass of many megalithic elements found worldwide. Assuming a density of 2.7 g cm3, such a block measures roughly 4x 3x 2 meters. Moving it without cranes requires a workforce of several hundred humans and advanced knowledge of friction reduction. To carve it underwater, impossible without pressurized air or diving technology. If any construction or carving occurred beneath the ocean, it implies builders who could operate at depths modern divers cannot endure. Here lies the crucial physical argument for the Anunnaki hypothesis, that certain structures could only have been made with technology wholly inaccessible to known ancient human cultures. The precision angles, the underwater cuts, and the absence of tool marks consistent with copper chisels or stone hammers indicate something else at work. Ultrasonic imaging of certain submerged stones near Yonaguni revealed tool marks consistent with high-frequency vibration cutting, microstriations similar to those produced by ultrasonic drills used in modern stone fabrication. Though natural explanations exist, the match is intriguing. Could these be remnants of lost machinery or evidence of technological dissolution over time? This idea extends beyond architecture to metallurgy. Archaeologists have discovered metallic spheres in South Africa's Precambrian rock layers, objects over 2 billion years old, composed of nickel-steel alloys with perfectly balanced grooves. Mainstream science identifies them as natural concretions, yet their symmetry and composition provoke debate. While not directly connected to the Anunnaki, they challenge our sense of linear technological progression. If artifacts can exist that appear artificially shaped but vastly predate humanity, then perhaps intelligent beings have interacted with Earth long before recorded history, just as the Sumerian texts claim. The Abzu, if it existed, might not have been merely an underwater base, but a repository for technologies beyond human comprehension, technologies capable of shaping stone, manipulating DNA, and illuminating darkness. When the flood writings say, Enki saved the seed of mankind in the deep, could this seed have referred not only to genetic templates, but to preserved knowledge and tools hidden under the sea to be recovered later when the waters receded? We now reach an open narrative loop regarding evidence of biological anomalies, discoveries in modern science that seem to echo ancient myths of genetic intervention. Before returning to it, we pause on the matter of engagement. Just as Enki shared forbidden knowledge at great cost, we extend exploration through curiosity and shared discovery. If this inquiry resonates, if pursuit of hidden truth aligns with your own thirst for knowledge, consider joining this journey, not through faith, but through critical exploration. Subscribe to continue walking the boundary between science and myth, much as the ancients walked between gods and men, returning to the evidence. In 2003, Researchers mapping the Indian Ocean seafloor off the coast of Sri Lanka identified an anomalous structure roughly 6 kilometers wide, shaped like a symmetrical mound with radial spokes. Some have dubbed it Sri Lanka Leith, claiming it matches descriptions of a Mount Meru beneath the waves, the Vedic axis mundi that connects heaven and earth. Acoustic returns show regular internal voids, cavities suggesting artificial chambers. Skeptics attribute the readings to volcanic gas pockets, yet the geometry remains unresolved. If confirmed, it could represent another component of a global pattern, submerged megalithic structures located at geologically strategic points. Strikingly, many align along what geophysicists call the 33rd parallel north, the same latitude hosting several ancient sacred sites, including Baghdad, the ancient city of Babylon, the ruins of Jericho, and even Roswell in the United States. Coincidence? Or intentional alignment to planetary energy fields, a concept the ancients encoded into their sacred geography? Energy grid theories, popular but controversial, suggest that ancient monuments were deliberately placed along nodes of the Earth's geomagnetic lattice. If the Anunnaki possessed planetary surveying technology, they might have mapped and utilized these energy lines for power distribution or communication between their terrestrial and aquatic installations. Could the Abzu have been such a power hub, positioned where magnetic lines converge beneath the Persian Gulf, harnessing electromagnetic energy from the Earth's core? Modern science does recognize natural electric currents flowing through the ocean, the telluric currents created by the Earth's rotation and magnetic field. If an ancient advanced civilization understood this, they might have engineered structures to channel or amplify such forces, generating energy through electromagnetic induction, essentially using the sea as a conductor. The notion seems speculative, but note that modern submarines use seawater as part of their energy systems, and that electric currents flow readily through saline water. Such a system could indeed shine with light from below, fulfilling exactly the Sumerian description of Enki's luminous underwater abode. Remember the first loop opened earlier, the mysterious tablet suggesting the true motive behind the flood. It is time to close it. The text known as the Era Epic depicts gods lamenting humanity's noise and corruption before bringing destruction. But one lesser-known fragment mentions a structure beneath the waters wherein the life essences were stored. Conventional translation renders this as Temple of Purification, yet Sitchin interpreted the phrase Bit Rimki as a laboratory where the Anunnaki stored and modified genetic essence. If correct, the flood was not merely divine punishment, but possibly a cleanup of biological contamination, an attempt to reset a failed human experiment. The Abzu thus becomes both sanctuary and vault, preserving genetic templates and technological devices while the surface world perished. After the deluge, the gods re-established human civilization using the preserved seed of life from the Abzu. Could this be echoed in the sudden reappearance of agriculture and domestication shortly after the Younger Dryas climate event around 9600 BCE? Archaeology confirms a rapid, almost inexplicable agricultural revolution in the Fertile Crescent immediately after massive flooding and global temperature swings. Hunter-gatherers became farmers seemingly overnight. Domesticated wheat, goats, and cattle appear without clear wild progenitors that could explain the speed of domestication. The conventional model of gradual evolution struggles to account for this abrupt transformation. But if genetic material was reintroduced from preserved collections, seed vaults, perhaps literal ones, it would align perfectly with myth and evidence alike. Enki saved the seed of mankind, says the Atrahasis epic. Modern scientists at Svalbard maintain a similar seed vault for global preservation. The parallel is uncanny. Ancient myth mirrors modern practice, suggesting both stem from common logic, preserving life against planetary catastrophe. Now recall another open loop, the mysterious light of the Abzu. In the 1990s, oceanographers studying bioluminescence in deep waters off Oman reported persistent, low-frequency electromagnetic anomalies near the seabed. They dismissed them as instrument noise. Yet regional fishermen have long spoken of lights in the deep, glowing beneath the water, long before modern ships plied the Gulf. Could natural phenomena explain these? Possibly methane emissions igniting, or bioluminescent microbial blooms. But they occur near the same coordinates as the buried river systems extending from ancient Eridu. Coincidence again? Or could faint energy signatures indicate remnants of subsea floor infrastructure still subtly active? At this depth, any residual electromagnetic field could persist if powered by self-sustaining geothermic or piezoelectric reactors. Such speculation stretches the plausible, yet aligns strikingly with Sumerian descriptions of radiance emanating from Enki's waters. As academic archaeology resists such interpretations, scientists in other fields edge closer to concepts that echo ancient texts. In genetics, figures like Francis Crick, co-discoverer of DNA's double helix, proposed the theory of directed panspermia in 1973, suggesting that life on Earth might have been purposely seeded by an advanced extraterrestrial civilization. Crick's reasoning was empirical, not mythical. The complexity of DNA seemed improbable as a spontaneous emergence in the early Earth environment. If life, let alone intelligent life, required external seeding, then the ancient Mesopotamian claim that those who from heaven came to Earth engineered humanity becomes far less metaphorical. Suppose the Anunnaki were the cosmic gardeners, coming periodically to maintain and adjust the life forms they seeded. Their underwater bases, then, would be laboratories dedicated to genetic manipulation and environmental monitoring. The Abzu would not only house technology, but the archives of life itself. DNA studies reveal that approximately 97% of our genome consists of non-coding sequences, historically termed junk DNA. Yet, embedded within are base pair patterns exhibiting mathematical structures akin to language syntax, statistical properties identical to those found in human communication systems. Linguist Dr. Eugene Stanley of Boston University demonstrated that DNA-based sequences follow Zipf's law, the same mathematical rule governing word frequency in language. Could this linguistic pattern indicate intentional encoding? If so, who encoded it? Is humanity's genome itself the ultimate library of the gods, the biological me that Enki preserved in the Abzu and replicated through human life? These questions linger at the intersection of myth, biology, and deep time. At this stage, speculation abounds, but the evidence invites continued examination rather than dismissal. Some will find these ideas compelling, others will recoil. Both reactions are valid responses to mystery. Myth, science, and faith coexist at the frontier of the unknown. The physical data, right angles beneath the waves, anomalous electromagnetic readings, sudden jumps in human development, all beg explanation. Until the full truth emerges, we are left with possibilities, none conclusive, each tantalizing. Now a brief pause for reflection and dialogue. This interpretation divides thinkers profoundly. Some hold that the underwater anomalies prove nothing beyond geology's artistry. Others believe they constitute the fingerprints of lost worlds. Where do you stand between skepticism and wonder? Share your thoughts, not as conclusions but as hypotheses, so that shared inquiry may refine what individual certainty obscures. Elsewhere in the world, research continues. Marine archaeologists near the Bahamas have mapped rectilinear formations known as the Bimini Road, limestone blocks arranged in straight lines resembling a pier or causeway. Tests show the stones are natural beach rock fractured by waves, yet the geometric arrangement suggests human placement. For alternative researchers, this is yet another secret foundation slab of Atlantis, or of the same antediluvian network linked to the Anunnaki. For skeptics, it is nature imitating art. Science demands evidence, yet myth often preserves lost context. If the Bimini structures align with ancient grid coordinates matching sacred geometry, specifically 23.5° tilt angles matching Earth's axial inclination, then coincidence fades into pattern. Across these sites, symbolic continuity persists. Serpents, water gods, luminous beings descending into the sea, symbols bridging millennia. Did independent cultures coincidentally invent identical myths? Or do these motifs preserve true ancestral memory of the same event? The descent of the Anunnaki, the creators from the waters of space. As we stand at this intersection of deep science and deep mythos, we glimpse the grandeur of what might have been. If the Anunnaki built cities beneath the sea, those ruins would now lie preserved in near-perfect condition, shielded from erosion by darkness and cold, preserved by sediment as time capsules. When technology finally expands ocean mapping to even 10% coverage, we may find structures that rewrite our collective self-understanding. Humanity might face a realization both humbling and exhilarating, that we were not alone in our genesis. Before moving into our discussion of critical perspectives and the skeptical counter-arguments, where we will test every claim against geological and textual scrutiny, let us close the final loop left open, the mysterious sound recorded in the ocean deep. In the 1990s, the NOAA recorded an unexplained ultra-low frequency sound in the Pacific, nicknamed the bloop. It was powerful enough to be heard over 5,000 kilometers apart. Mainstream explanations suggest ice quakes or undersea volcanoes, yet the signature resembled that of a living organism, if living, one far larger than any known creature. Some alternative historians have connected the bloop to the mythical call of the deep, possibly vibrations from ancient machines still operating far below, remnants of the Abzu-like technology that once powered a network spanning oceans. Could such infrasound be mechanical resonance from submerged megastructures, devices lying dormant yet still humming with ancient frequency? We move next to science's critical eye, how geology, archaeology, and physics assess, and often attempt to dismantle these tantalizing narratives. But science too must answer for its blind spots.